It had been a rough Christmas Eve at Simpson's bar, perched on the steep slopes of the Sierras. The settlement was snowed in, and the men gathered were a mix of rugged miners and prospectors, their spirits as low as the falling barometer. Rain had lashed the gulch for a week, turning every stream into a torrent and isolating them completely. Now, a freezing wind howled outside, piling snow against the windows. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. The men were grumpy, their holiday cheer drowned by the relentless storm. The owner of the bar, a man named Simpson, tried to lift their spirits, but even his forced cheerfulness fell flat. The conversation was grim, filled with talk of lost claims and dwindling supplies. One man, Dick Bullen, was particularly downcast. He'd just returned from a long and fruitless trip, only to find his wife ill and his young son, Johnny, deeply disappointed. The boy had been eagerly awaiting a visit from Santa Claus, a concept entirely new to this rough-and-tumble community. Hayes' mother had filled his head with tales of the magical gift-bringer, and now, with no way to get to the nearest town, his hopes were about to be dashed. As Dick shared his story, a hush fell over the bar. The men, hardened by a life of struggle, felt a pang of sympathy. The thought of the little boy's heartbreak resonated with them. Suddenly, a man known as the Old Man, a grizzled prospector who rarely spoke, slammed his fist on the table. He declared that Johnny would not be disappointed. Santa Claus, he announced, would come to Simpson's bar. A wave of determination swept through the room. They decided that Dick Bullen would make the dangerous journey to the nearest settlement, Tuttleville, to get presents for the boy, too. It was a perilous idea. The trail was treacherous, buried under deep snow, with swollen rivers to cross. But the men were resolute. They pooled their money, a collection of gold dust and coins, and handed it to Dick. They helped him saddle his horse, wrapping him in extra layers and offering words of encouragement. Dick rode out into the blizzard. The men in the bar waited, their own troubles forgotten, their thoughts focused on the success of his mission. They spent the night imagining the joy on little Johnny's face, a shared hope that warmed them more than the roaring fire. Hours later, long after midnight, a faint noise was heard over the wind. It was the sound of a horse, and soon, a figure emerged from the swirling snow. It was Dick Bullen, exhausted but triumphant. He was laden with strange lumpy packages. The men cheered as he stumbled inside, his face frostbitten but beaming. He had a drum, a toy trumpet, some candies, and even a little violin. They weren't grand gifts, but to these men, they were treasures. They carefully wrapped the presents and stealthily carried them to Dick's cabin. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the sun shone brightly on the fresh snow. The men gathered quietly outside the Bullen cabin, peering through the window. They watched as little Johnny, his eyes wide with wonder, discovered the pile of gifts by the fireplace. He let out a shout of pure joy that echoed through the quiet mountain air. The miners, tough men with calloused hands and weary hearts, found their own eyes growing misty. On that Christmas morning, in the most unlikely of places, they had witnessed a small miracle. Santa Claus had indeed come to Simpson's bar, brought not by reindeer, but by the grit, generosity, and shared heart of a community of lonely men.